started off, I have a specialty in my undergraduate degree. My BA was mostly European diplomacy. My mentor was an Estonian German historian. And then for my master's degree, I studied Tommy Douglas, CCF government, and unions. So I did a bunch of labor history. But when I came to teach at the university, the opening was in Indigenous Studies. And so I had to work up that field. And then that was 1990 or so. And then in 1998, I was hired by the Metis to teach in the Gabriel Dumont College. And that was a wonderful experience.
Nice. Nice. And that's, I mean, Gabriel Dumont is one of the, well, he was the secondary leader basically of the whole Riel Rebellion. And if anybody knows some of Saskatchewan's history anyways.
That's true.
So
he was the fighter. That's why they named the college here after Gabriel Dumont, because they were, the Métis were and still are fighting for their rights. And their, it's a very interesting history, the history of resistance, because it's a minority. You know, my wife and her family are Métis, and you guys are Métis, and so.
Which we don't talk about for some reason.
Well, no, with all the discrimination and stuff, I think a lot of the people who denied or hide their Métis history is because they could pass as white, and so their kids never got beat up on the school ground, and they got jobs because, you know, for a long time, if you were a Métis or an Indian, nobody would hire you, and so the rule was sort of last hired, first fired, and so if you could pass, then you passed, and that way you can get employment and your kids are safe and all that kind of stuff. It's when you get older that you really want to know who or what your identity is, and that's where people come back to do genealogy and figure out what their Métis history is. And there's a lot to be proud of in Métis history, because it's not just resistance movements or rebellions or things like that. The Métis helped to create this country. Yeah. I would say even more so in some ways at least than First Nations did, in terms of the relationships between newcomers and people who lived here. So.
Yeah, well, if I remember any of my history correctly, it was a big part of the French that originally showed up to find the New World or whatever, and the Métis are a result of that, because the French and the natives really found an equilibrium, and they were happy with living with each other. They weren't particularly forceful in each other's ways, and they found a good balance and a good alliance with each other. But when the English showed up, they're like, oh, they've got it kind of settled, let's just go take it over now.
The English had a sort of an arm's length relationship with the First Nations people.
Yeah.
They had to marry. That was an indigenous diplomatic custom. But the French lived with indigenous peoples, whereas the English didn't want to live with them. And so that's the real big difference of how the relationship subsequently developed. And where we're at today, because indigenous people are still kept at a distance from the rest of society, from English society. Yeah. Today, but because what I guess I'm agreeing with you, saying that the French and the First Nations did reach this accommodation where they lived and had children together, and an economic relationship that was beneficial to both sides, and it developed from there.
Yeah. When I wondered about that too, with a lot of the tensions that are going on. I mean, again, now because there's a new wound that's been opened up, but the idea that, again, people are trying to run from the truth, run from history, sort of thing like that. And I've been told my whole life that I was white. And whatever. It doesn't really matter that much.
You tan really well in the summer, though.
But I have a really good tan. I mean, my grandma has the best tan I've seen at anybody in January. So
that's a permanent tan.
Yeah, and there was just certain things. Well, especially when I had long hair, and I had a good tan, and it's like, are you sure somebody didn't lie to you? But at the end of the day, it doesn't matter that much. But I mean, I come from just the edge of that level where racism was still kind of pushed around for everything, and it's better to mind your P's and Q's, sort of thing like that, and just pretend white to be white, sort of thing like that. Not that it was ever told to us that way, but then you get older, and within the last decade or two, where all this talk of being who you are, and things like Ancestry.com or 23andMe, where you can actually genetically find out who you are, sort of thing, and it's kind of interesting, because I've actually been thinking about getting it done just to see how much of it that is there, or what other parts there actually are there and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
But the other part is too is that it's not so much I don't have to feel bad about wanting to make jokes or something for some of it, but at the same time, I mean, you hear about all this cultural appropriation kind of stuff too, and
Yes.
it's like, come on, guys, like you can't wear a feather on your head at Halloween and pretend to be a native person because that's somehow stealing something from somebody.
Well, I think I'm not certain about the costume kind of things, but mascots and stuff, it's kind of insulting, I think, to Indigenous
That
people.
one's, yeah.
They're not allowed to really be who they are, or to be part of sort of the development of a relationship with sports teams, but they are appropriated in that sense that, you know, the Cherokee vehicles, you got the Comanche airplanes, you know, you got the used to be what was it, the land of the, I was thinking of the butter. They used to sell butter in the States, and they used an Indian. Prudential Insurance, I think it was, had an Indian on a rock looking very stoic and stuff.
Yeah.
So there's a sense of the appropriation was virility, that the men were virile and warriors and all this kind of stuff, when in fact they may have been that, but they were far more complex. So they've been, I think the resistance to these mascots and the cultural appropriation is that it's perpetuating stereotypes that originated way back 100, 200 years ago, and not allowing people to be who you are. Like, Native peoples are respected as Native peoples if they're dead.
Yeah.
So Sitting Bull or Pound Maker, whoever, they're dead now, so you can say, oh, yeah, they're nice. But if you meet an Indian person on the street, you know, you can be mean to them.
Yeah.
Just
Well, and that's even saying it that way is something that I had to be corrected even when I was in high school still. It's like, Indians are from India.
Yeah,
These are
that's right.
natives. Yeah. So, but there's certain people, like I come home to visit people, and I mean, yeah, you say it, friends of mine still say Indians and stuff like that, and I know exactly what they mean.
Yeah.
But it's like, when I say, it's, oh, we went for Indian food or something like that, and like, what do you mean, like pemmican and bannock and stuff? No, like actual Indians. Like
exactly. Well, when I was teaching, I remember this one woman came to me after a class, and she said, you know, Bob, you use Indian, Aboriginal, Indigenous, Native in your lectures. And she says, and that's all fine, she says, but if you ever talk about me, I'm an Indian. That's what I knew. She was a little older than me at the time, because that's what she grew up with, right?
Yeah.
So now there's a new generation growing up with Indigenous. When I was teaching, it was Aboriginal, and in fact, that's the word used in the Constitution. And the Aboriginal rights are in the Constitution, not Indigenous rights. Indigenous is the contemporary, politically correct word.
Yeah.
But it changes over generations. And, you know, if you insult somebody unwittingly by saying you're Indian, well, you know, that's unfortunate.
Yeah.
But I always remember that one of my students who said, well, any of those terms apply, but this is what applies to me. So.
Yeah, one, the fact that line keeps moving is the other thing. And it's, most of us are fine with it too. It's like, well, sure, but you got to give us, you know, a week to kind of remember what we're saying sometimes, because this is a brand new thing to us. You know, don't attack me instantly because right, there's a new term today, kind of thing. And well, the one thing is, like, you were giving a lot of examples of mostly American sporting stuff like that.
Yes.
Everybody usually glazes right over Eskimos.
Yeah.
Edmonton Eskimos. I mean, that's a sports team, and
that's right.
People have talked about that. And I've seen people from way up north somewhere talking about, it's like, well, yeah, and we're not actually Eskimos. I mean, that's, again, kind of the whole, you know, labeling of what we are. Like, we're a Iqaluit, or I'm sure I'm saying that wrong too, but, you know, we're this tribe, or we want to be referred to as these peoples. With that said, though, Edmonton Eskimos is my team, so that's the one I root for. So,
well, now they're the Elks, though, so it's going to be harder to cheer, I would say. But these are outsider terms, right? So that Eskimo was a Cree term. So the fur traders came along with the Cree, the Nahia people, and the Cree people took them as far north as they could go until they ran into other peoples. And when they ran into the Inuit, the fur trader said, well, who are these people? And the translation was Eskimos. Meaning,
Oh, I didn't actually know that.
yeah. And so it was eaters of raw meat kind of thing. And
Okay.
there was another one, I can't remember the term, it was pointed skins and things like this. So they're all outside of terms depending on the European person or Caucasian person, whoever, who was with a certain indigenous group at the time they met a different one. And so the names get adopted. And they're all outside names because the Ojibwe,
Yeah.
they're Anishinaabe. There's various versions of Anishinaabe. So Anishinaabe, Anishinaabe, different ways to say it. That's how they know themselves, whereas we know them maybe as Ojibwe. In the States, or Ojibwe, in the States they're Chippewa,
Oh, okay.
because that's what the Americans heard when they were fur trading and stuff like that. So I think that's part of the root of the problem of this. The Native peoples are just sick and tired of being misidentified,
Yeah.
and then their culture is appropriate. Those parts of their culture that are artifacts from the old days, like the equestrian bit and the warrior bit and all this kind of stuff. It's taken by the people who want an identity and don't know what their own is, and so they'd rather play at being an Indian or an indigenous person than to research their own
Yeah.
identity and figure out who they are.
Well, and talk about appropriation. I mean, the equestrian part is also fairly new because there
Yeah.
was no horses in North America until 500 years ago when the conquistadors brought them.
Yeah, the Spanish reintroduced them. There was an indigenous horse way back, but they were pedestrian. You're right; it was very pedestrian.
Yeah.
So if you go to Waniscawan,
Mm-hmm.
and if you look at the sculptures there, they have with the buffalo run, they have people sort of waving blankets and things like that. So that's how they funneled them into the corrals or over the cliffs, the jumps.
Yeah.
And it wasn't chasing them. Well, somebody started making noises and shooting at them, and they just stampede. But then every once in a while, somebody would pop up, and they'd keep them in the funnel.
Yeah.
Later on, then you could do it a different way, but with horses and that. But originally, it was very pedestrian.
Yeah. One a very big team effort.
Yeah. Oh,
Because,
yeah.
boy,
Everybody,
oh boy, like
yeah.
running a herd of buffalo off a cliff, like
Yeah.
that's a big deal because I mean self-preservation is a big thing, but you also
Yeah.
know that you're in a herd and stampeding. I mean, as the animal, like we're running from something. Where do we go?
Yeah.
So
North of your mom and dad's place, there's a big Metis buffalo jump there.
yeah,
But to cross the river, I'm not exactly sure whether it's north or south of the old buffalo jump. There's the Gardapi crossing. So you got
Okay.
Gabriel de Mont's crossing, which is now a bridge, right? Gabriel's crossing.
yeah, that's actually right by mom and dad's place.
It is. It
Yeah.
is. Yeah. And but the Gardapis had their own crossing as well, north of Batoche somewhere. I don't know exactly where.
Okay,
Yeah.
that sounds right because there's a ton of Gardapis that live in Duck Lake, but it's the same chunk of river that kind of flows right through that whole part of the province, sort of thing, too, right? So, I can imagine it wouldn't be that much further down. And I mean, Batoche is only 10 kilometers or so, I think, from mom and dad's farm, even.
Yeah.
So it would. And I remember growing up and going there a handful of times, kind of learning some of the history, and then not realizing that our family was actually directly a part of it, even.
Oh yeah.
Because
You
apparently-
were resisting. Yeah.
Apparently they were horse thieves. They were stealing horses from American soldiers and bringing them up through Saskatchewan and then selling them to other
Oh, really?
platoons of soldiers, apparently. So,
That's an age-old practice.
yeah. Yeah, which, I mean, good job.
It takes organization, skill, stealth, ability, and courage above all. Because they used to raid each other's encampments to try to get the horses and that. And it takes a lot of skill. It was the young people who were doing it mostly, 16, 17 years old, because they wanted to get a reputation. Because they had to earn their spot around the campfire to the council fire. I mean, how do you do it? Well, in warfare. Well, if there's no war, then just go steal a few horses and show your military ability.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and that's how Louis Riel and Gabriel Dumont actually got more horses for their cause. It's because they knew the Gardapi, Garapi families, sort of thing like that. And they're like, well, these guys got some of the best horses from soldiers, so they can hook you up.
Yeah. See, when you start investigating your own history, you run across all this stuff. Some of it comes down through the family, and some of it's been recorded over time that you can add to your story.
Mm-hmm.
But if you don't look, you'll never know.
Yeah, well, it's kind of interesting that I grew up someplace that was really close to my family's history, and I didn't realize like how close we were tied to a lot of it, because
you're even closer than you think. Because
yeah,
just down the road was the original camp. It wasn't Batoche, because they're buffalo hunters, right?
Yeah.
So you're on this side. So you're at what's the name of that little place down past your farm there?
Petiteville.
Yeah, Petiteville. Yeah.
That was the main ferry crossing or river crossing or whatever.
Yeah, and it was perfect for a bunch of buffalo hunters. But as soon as the buffalo start to disappear and stuff, you know, the Métis at Red River are always farming plus buffalo hunting plus maybe working for the fur companies and stuff like that. And so in the 1870s, around where your family lives, the buffalo declined, so you've got a farm. Well, the soil at your parents' ranch there is really ranch soil, sandy. It's not good for agriculture. Yeah. So the Métis moved across the river, where it's really good soil, so they could farm.
Yeah.
And Bell's family, before they could really get established on the banks of the South Saskatchewan here, the government came and used or encouraged fraud to dispossess the Métis. When the Métis resisted, then they sent the army. So.
Yeah, that sounds about right. I mean, and they weren't thought of as people. I mean, that's why a lot of that stuff had been turned into a battle. A lot of at the start, where apparently Batoche has actually changed that some of the videos and some of the history to soften the blow of what happened. It's like, well, no, you thought you were superior to them, and you didn't think of them as people. That's part of the reason why they could slaughter these savages, sort of thing like that, without mercy.
Yeah. But
at the same time, though, too, it was the thing to do in those days, and it's
the attitude, right?
Yeah, and it's shitty because it's so fresh. It's a fresh wound that's still being reopened a lot of times with things that happened, but we can't really look at it with today's eyes and expect to see the same story or understand history if all we can do is see, well, I wouldn't have done that. Well, there's lots of people that wouldn't have done that now.
Yeah, well,
but
as an historian, I say, well, the issue for a person like myself as an historian is not to necessarily judge people by our standards. I mean, there are some things that are right and wrong that cross the ages, but to try to understand what people were facing at the time.
Yeah.
So, and that helps you understand their actions, because we think they have all these choices, when really they only had a narrow field of choices. And so then they had to choose, well, which way is the best way? Should we just roll over and let them take our land, or should we stand up and fight for it? And remember, that was the second time they're being dispossessed. They already dispossessed Red River.
Yeah, that's right. Well, yeah, and that was, where we're sitting now was still considered Ruperts' land 150 years ago. Mm-hmm. So it was some, and again, Rupert obviously is a British name.
Rupert was the king's cousin.
Yeah, so it was a chunk of the colonies that was supposedly owned by the English, but it's like it clearly wasn't settled then, because they were still it was still in progress, shall we say.
If you look at the maps of the day, what they know about is the rivers, right?
Yeah.
And maybe 100 yards outside the rivers, and so that's what was settled, not even settled, but that was what had been explored.
Yeah.
And it was always news to First Nations and to Inuit and other people who the government has told, we own the land. They go, well, where did you get title for the land?
Yeah.
Well, we didn't give it to you. So it's this assumption, and we still have these assumptions that we were talking earlier about the racism. The same attitude that says, let's kill them, is with us today, which is, let's ignore them, right? And in other words, so right now, all these children's graves are being found, right? And the government and the churches, or the Catholic Church, I should say, are resisting it. And there's a huge chunk of the Canadian population who resist accepting what has happened. Whereas Native peoples knew it for generations. This knowledge of brother or sister never came home. This has been passed down for generations. Yeah. But it's the same attitude that the same attitude that said, well, let's just take it over, let's dispossess them, let's defraud them or shoot them, whatever it is. the racism behind that is still with us today.
Yeah.
Right, and I used the example of the denial, but it's worse than that. It's racism in hiring still, racism in the hospitals.
Yeah.
You see that came out a lot before they found the babies here in their graves. Walking down the street, Indians going to a store. Who's following them? The store dick doesn't follow me.
No.
Because I'm glowing white. They
Yeah.
follow brown people. And not necessarily the Filipinos or other people, but Indians,
Yeah.
First Nations peoples. And, and these are attitudes that are so ingrained in us that it's unconscious in many cases.
Yeah.
That you see an Indian and your knees jerk up and, they're again thought of as lesser than you.
Yeah, that's the whole systemic racism that keeps popping up that people want to try to address. And when something like 215 bodies were identified, and it's like, okay, we'll leave it on that. Let's take that apart. Like, why was it 215? Not to say that the number has any significance, but think about how long it takes to find the first one, and then keep digging and then identify that many. Why did that story break when it did? Shouldn't it have been a story the instant somebody was found?
Well, it was suppressed to begin with. In other words,
right?
It's like the residential schools, right, where these children were victims of the abuse that went on there. The churches knew about it, and in many cases, the government knew about it as well. What the churches did was they just transferred the guy.
Yeah.
And then they just denied it. They just denied it. The Catholic Church denies it right today.
Yeah.
They won't give up their files when they should give the files, at least so the families can bury the dead,
Mm-hmm.
and rebury them and bring them home, as they say. It's that same attitude. We know what's good for you. We're superior to you.
Yeah.
Don't rock the boat. Our white boat. Don't rock it.
Yeah. Well, and the other, good and bad thing about it is that there is something like social media that helps people understand. And as soon as that story broke, everybody knew about it.
Yeah.
But even today, now it's August, who's talking about it still?
Yeah. The attitude there, I think, I've heard about it a lot at the university over the years from students, is the white students say, just get over it. Well, they can say that because they've never really dealt with anything other than, Dad grounded them for 30 days or wouldn't let them take the car.
Yeah. Right?
Whereas, we're talking about people's lives here, and they say, just get over it. Well, it's not easy to get over it. We had a video that young Indigenous people made about some young girls young women in Pineview, the provincial corrections in Prince Albert. And they had addictions, and they were prostituting themselves and stuff like this, and they raised it, saying, just get over it, Paul. They said, you get addicted to a drug, and then, have to feed yourself and your family somehow, and, is it going to be any different for you than us? Just get over it? Yeah. Easy for you to say, it's really hard to do. And it's that attitude of superiority. But to me, it's an attitude of denial.
Absolutely, yeah.
You have a problem? Well, it's not my problem, so just get over it.
Yeah. Yeah, that whole idea of addiction and the other, family and problems and stuff like that, the whole idea of get over it. It's like, well, when your sense of family is destroyed right from the get-go, and you're born into that, and you don't know what an actual family is supposed to be, and then because of the color of your skin, everybody else is shitting on you at the same time. It's like, well, I'm pushing this stone uphill forever. Like I'm doing the whole Sisyphus thing, right? Where I'm basically like doomed to live a shit life because I was born to some family. Like nobody has a choice of that.
Yeah.
And it's good that there is an understanding of there needs to be some sort of recompense leveled to people, but people getting online and bitching at the Catholic Church, the government, and expecting something's going to happen. Like let's be a little bit more tactful,
a little more realistic. The government actually acts as a bad parent, rather than really helping Indigenous peoples by listening to their elders or listening to the people who say this is what we should do. The government throws money at them and says, just go away. That's what I mean by the bad parent.
Yeah.
When the issue of the schools first came out, they said, the government said, set up a healing foundation and stuff like this. Well, gee, a person who living a difficult life, maybe you should spend more time with them than the few months it took to negotiate a payout of money.
Yeah.
They need something long term, and people say, okay, well, maybe they do, but they're not willing to. Non-native people are not willing to actually do something about it. To help the individuals and the communities heal. You raise a really interesting point about the families, and you steal the children for 100 years, and so they never see mom and dad, right? And in terms of every day, we saw mom and dad every day, and so you absorb as a child parenting skills, right? And even if you grow up later and say, well, I reject some of the parenting skills, or get the belt on the ass or whatever, so I'm not going to do that. You still had a model. The kids who were in these schools for 10, 12 years, 8, 10, 12 years, didn't have a model. They had the priest or the minister or the nun at the front of the class. And their response at that time, the school's a little different now, but the response at that time is that, if you were talking or giggling or whatever, that you got the strap. Yeah. Or you got, they did all sorts of evil things to the children to get them to stop speaking their language and stuff. But just the idea that the violence towards children was not a traditional part of Indigenous culture. Quite the opposite. Yeah. And I would say it was introduced by the churches and the state-run schools who used violence to solve a conflict between the teacher and the student. Yeah. So when they go home, they don't have any model for how to be a parent. And so anytime there's an issue between the spouses or with the children, violence is the answer. You slap them around, punch them in the face. That was not the way they were taught. But they weren't taught by their parents anymore. In fact, it was the grandparents who taught the children. Yeah. Because mom and dad are really busy doing other things, right? Trying to survive.
Well, and not only that, I mean, that's, again, one of those things that has no need for racial distinction, because it's the Catholics that are doing this. But when it's white people that are Catholic doing it to other white people, it's like, oh, well, they just have some family issues or whatever sort of thing, and it's just, again, swept under the rug because, they'll just go to church and say a couple of Hail Marys and everything will be fine. But they're white, so they get a pass anyways.
They do. Oh, yeah.
But it's like Native people are learned and taught to be shitty, aggressive people. And it's like, well, yeah. Of course you're going to have problems with them, especially because you're already talking about them as the other. They're already beneath you. And then it's like, see how violent they are? See how drunk they are? Or whatever? It's like, well, you pushed all of that on them.
Yeah. And people who have no personal knowledge of Indigenous peoples are the first to judge. Yeah. Right? Because they've heard the stereotypes. And they've seen it. It's the stereotypes of the racism is taught at home first, because the children don't see each other. You look at little kids playing, a Native kid and a white kid and an Asian kid and a black kid, they're playing. Yeah. As one, Alma Katwe had said, a Cree elder, she says, the children see each other's spark. They see the fire inside each other, and they don't see the difference. That's taught. The difference is taught. Yeah. So when they're little kids, they just love each other and they're having fun and stuff. And if there's conflict, that's ignored or forgotten in a few minutes, right? It's taught at home. Then it's taught in the schools, or at least reinforced in the schools. Yeah. Because the expectation of the white teacher at the front of a Métis or an Indian kid is that they're lesser beings, right? Yeah. And they're the first, if there's any issue in the classroom, they're the first to suffer the consequences, not little Mary or little Johnny, the white kids from the suburbs. Yeah. And that goes all the way up to the university level. I've seen it up there and I've heard it up there to the university level. So if this is what's happening through the schools and all the way up to the university level, then if you look at the politicians, it's no wonder that they are resistant to doing anything for Native peoples. And when they want to do something, they're the bad parent. And they throw money. Yeah. And that money helps because you have to pay people to help you through therapy or whatever it is. But it's not the be-all, end-all. It's to create the resources within the community to help themselves. Yeah. People used to ask me, non-Native people used to ask me, so how can we help those of us who are compassionate? And I said, well, the first thing to do is get out of the way. Yeah. Right? Because let people make their own decisions. And if you let Native peoples make their own decisions, in many cases they make really good decisions. Now, Darcy Bear at the Whitecap took a place that was 90% unemployment, a reserve, 90% unemployment, a crazy amount of addiction and stuff like that. All of a sudden, people are employed. They got their a Canadian PGA golf course, and
Holy
they got,
smokes!
yeah, and they got the big casino. They were supposed to go downtown here, but racism drove it out of town.
Of course.
And so they bring in all these acts to play music and stuff, and they just built a hotel and stuff. They were allowed to make their own decisions, and when they made their own decisions, they made some really good decisions. Now, I'm not saying that now they're perfect. There's no addictions on their reserve or anything like that.
Yeah.
Far from it. But they're in a position now because they're earning their own money that they can take that money and say, "This is what we're going to do with it. We're going to provide better education for our children, or we're going to create employment." If you go to down the street here to Petro-Canada and you gas your car, there's 2 people working at Petro-Canada. Usually don't see one. There's usually 2 people working at Petro-Canada. You go to Creeway out in on the Indian Reserve, or the Urban Reserve, I should say. There's about 8-9 people working.
Yeah.
And the Indigenous leaders would say, well, it's better for people to have a job than to be on welfare. So we'll forego the profits that you would expect as a white person to employ our people, because the employment, you're doing something, it gives them self-worth. It gives them a little money so the kid can go, the boy can be put into hockey, the girl can be put in ballet, or whatever. They can own a home, buy a car. Things that non-Native people take for granted are denied because of poverty or other reasons to Native peoples. And so, people complain that, well, they spend so much money on Native peoples. Well, very little of that money gets to Native people. It goes through the Indian Affairs and all the salaries and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But when Native people can create a business, and there's lots of Native businesses across the country and in this province, that's their own money. So Indian Affairs can't tell them what to do with it.
Yeah.
They mostly, all the cases I know, they've reinvested that money in their community, first with employment, and then for education and things like that.
Yeah, but
that's
like
what I mean
any,
by getting out of the way. Sorry.
yeah, I wouldn't by any standard of hierarchy though too. Like as soon as you have some level of the haves and the have-nots, there's going to be some level of corruption.
Yeah.
So we're bringing them into a society or a power structure that they're not used to.
Mm-hmm.
So they're also trying to understand, like the rest of us, that if I want to stay on top, or I want to have some level of control, that means I'm going to have to sell my soul to some degree, because it's like I need to stay in power, and it's not just me that's in power, it's the handful of people that I need to keep happy that'll keep me in power.
It's the ins and outs. It's the band council system is an alien system to traditional Indigenous leadership.
Yeah.
And the band council system is based on the municipal model. So it's the ins and the outs.
Mm-hmm.
And so this family's in, and so everything flows through them, and then the other family gets in, that kind of stuff. The examples I'm talking about is that people got sick and tired of that.
Yeah.
And they said, what we're going to do is we're going to create a firewall. So all you people who are elected or selected, all your leaders, you can set the agenda. Yes, we want an urban reserve, we're going to put a gas station on it or whatever, convenience store. But you're not going to run the store, because that's when politicians get sticky fingers.
Oh, okay.
So they created a firewall. And that's what Bear did. He said, okay, we want an economic development on our reserve, and so we'll set the agenda and we'll put it in motion, but we're not running it. We'll hire people to run it. Even if we hire our own people, like send them to school to get a BCom and bring them back, and they can be a manager. But the firewall is there because in the first place they learned all the corruption you talked about was taught to them by non-Native society, and they got sick of that.
Yeah.
Because that just enriched the family, didn't enrich the reserve or the people. So they put the firewall in and say, which is what successful non-Native peoples do as well, right? That like Justin Trudeau, whether you love him or hate him, Justin Trudeau does not run the business. He doesn't run Air Canada. Doesn't run CBC.
Well, he doesn't run Canada necessarily either.
Well, no, it's a collective effort.
Yeah, it's him
they
and a
manage
group.
it.
Yeah.
They manage it. They
Yeah.
manage the economy. That's their role. Same with Mo and Regina. They manage the economy, right?
Yeah.
That's their role. Some are better managers than others, and so sometimes the economy is better. But without that firewall, then Mo and Kenny next door and Trudeau in Ottawa, with their sticky fingers, would be, sticking in their back pockets.
Yeah.
So Native peoples learned that lesson and said, no, we're not going to do it. And so all the successful businesses, Native businesses you see, I'll guarantee that there's a firewall between the people who said let's do it and the people who are doing it.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that makes way better sense because, I mean, hierarchies don't really work for actual equality, for one.
No.
I mean, it's a pyramid scheme.
Yeah.
And everybody tries to say it's like, well, Amway's a pyramid scheme or this other company's a pyramid. They're all pyramid schemes. Like, don't kid yourself. Like,
That's true.
Amazon is. I mean, Jeff Bezos is how many billions of dollars in? I mean, I think he's out of it now, but still, like, one person at the top.
Out of it, he doesn't have to run it day to day, you know.
Yeah.
But it's his business, so he gets all the money.
Yeah, but similar idea. I mean, it's some level of conglomerate at the top that the handful of small, individuals, sort of thing like that, are controlling millions of people. And it's no different when it comes to the reserves and stuff like that, where they were saying it's like, well, let's talk to one of your band members. And then they can make all the decisions. And they said no. That's what you're saying, right? Is that it's like, no, that's not how this is going to run.
You talk about a hierarchy. Native cultures traditionally were egalitarian, so they were kind of horizontal, right? So when you went to war, you followed the war chief, the best warrior. When you're going to trade, you went with the best trader. He was the leader. And the best hunter, he was the leader. But that's all sensitive to the context.
Yeah.
So the war chief didn't run a society, so to speak, when there wasn't a war.
Yeah.
And the hunter didn't have much to say when there wasn't a hunt. But the leaders over time often combined these roles. Big Bear was a perfect example. He was a spiritual leader. He was a leader of the hunt. He was a warrior, a diplomat, like a negotiator, all this kind of stuff. Mm-hmm. And but when there was no call for him to be the leader, he wasn't messing around trying to lead. Whereas we're non-native people go, one leader, you got to lead, even if he has a cabinet and stuff. It's just this idea that you're always in power, you guys. You make all the decisions.
Yeah.
Whereas Native people said, no, he makes the decision on the hunt, he makes the decision on war, he makes the decision on peace. And by saying that, I don't mean that the others don't have a say. They all have a say, right? And those leaders will do their best to accommodate all those different points of view.
Yeah, like an actual democracy and an
Yeah.
egalitarian way where it actually worked.
Yeah.